And that's only me being recorded because I'm on Spotlight. Okay. Let's get going. So, rubbing your hands together. So this is going back to the Chinese massage training that I did. This is a technique that we use in Chinese massage, both on ourselves and on other people. Just tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder and the arm. Side. The upper part of your chest. Belly. And your legs. Good. Now, just sit back a little. Feet out. Weight dropping back into the chair. Letting your thoughts settle. Letting your body settle. There's a nice sense of releasing tightness. It feels almost sometimes as though the body kind of flattens out a little bit when we sit back like this. We often hold ourselves in a particular posture for all sorts of reasons. You know, sometimes it's kind of like cultural stuff. Sometimes if you've had an injury, for instance, somewhere in the past, sometimes we've developed a posture to kind of help ease the pain in that area, or it's compensated for it or something like that. And all this can take a long time to kind of like allow to release. You don't want to kind of get into an analysis of it, but change happens slowly in the body, and we shouldn't force that pace. So these ideas about posture and how we sit and stand and how we move and that kind of thing, think of them as objectives rather than things that you have to do right now, things that you want to move towards, but which you're not necessarily going to be there right now. And then just doesn't necessarily mean that you're not doing good Tai Chi, by the way. I always remember a friend of mine who's dead now, unfortunately. He lived up in Glasgow, and he'd written a couple of books on Tai Chi, and he had another one, and he was invited down to London for a photo shoot. He said it was quite a fun day because they had all these young female models doing for the photographs. So he said he didn't mind, but he said it wasn't great Tai Chi. It was a fun day and you got paid for it, but there weren't good stances or anything like that. They just looked good, if you see what I mean. So it's what you're feeling that is really significant here. So once again, just letting first your hips settle, then your weight coming forwards. Feel that little bit of filling up in your legs, and feel how your body is quite naturally able to sort of, again, open out a little bit when there isn't any tightness, any stiffness holding it in. So we develop this feeling of space within the body, that release of tightness. It's like taking your foot out of a new pair of shoes. You know, they've been held in and the shoes have been quite new and stiff. And as soon as you take them out, it's almost like they kind of flop out. And then starting to turn your head, trying to make sure that you don't lose that space as you begin to move. So this is another thing that can often be quite hard. We can sometimes develop, and often for good reason, a habit of straining as we move. And sometimes that might be because, again, maybe we had an injury and it took a lot of effort to move with that injury, for instance. And all these habits are quite difficult to break. It's much easier to acquire a habit than it is to get rid of it. So one way of looking at what we're doing is that we're, rather than focusing on those bad habits, I just mentioned them because they are a factor. But what we want to try and do is focus on developing positive habits, good habits. So can we move even just a little bit? Can we turn our head without a tightening, with a nice smooth movement, a nice massaging quality to the movement? If we can, just staying with that, rather than thinking, right, now I've got to add to that. Just be patient with that. And then hands in front of you. And that's something that we should be thinking in terms of an approach to the movement. So all of the different exercises, both the simple and the complex. And remember, the term is cultivation, not controlling. We're not trying to use the mind to control the body. We're cultivating this way of moving that engages both body and mind. Going forwards. And then comes out to your sides and winding around. And then raising your hands. Back the other way. And easing forwards and push back. and then turn it slightly. And then on the other side. And then around. And then that other way. And then set with one foot. Which is how you're using this other foot for a little bit of support. On the other side. And then we're going to alternate from side to side. That involves a very slight shift over, movement in your hips and your pelvis. One more time on each side. Hands to your sides. Once again, turning your hands out and then easing forwards and sit down. And then fisherman castanet. and then rolling the ball in. Pigeon spreads its wings. Pushing away. And punch with both fists. When you roll your fingers in, make sure that your fist is hollow. Remember last week when I was talking about these various points on the body? Another one is just here in the middle of the palm of your hand. And you don't want to sort of grip tight as though you're squeezing that point. So your fingers are quite loose, like you're holding something like a delicate flower or a delicate object, or, you know, a small animal like a hamster or something like that in your hand. You don't want to drop it, you don't want it to escape, but you don't want to crush it either. So you end up with quite a, almost a kind of bulbous feeling in your hands. Hands out. Changing this time. Change to the wild goose. And parting the clouds. Okay. Dragon plucks the stars from the sky. All around. And both hands together. Pushing in two directions. Feeling movement in your back. Try and keep your hands the whole time slightly in front of your shoulders. Keep this broader feeling in your back. And just notice as much as you can of the sort of subtle changes in the muscles right up and down the length of your back. And those movements that you feel, particularly with the sideways push, we want to try and maintain when we add the turn. There'll be other movements as well. And what we want to try and do is to make sure that those other movements that are involved in turning don't create pressure on those sort of broadening movements that we've begun to recognize. So this time, turning from your hips. And the key is two things really. One is make sure that it really is your hips that you're turning from, not twisting up your back. And the other, of course, is not to move too far. There's a Chinese saying which is often applied to Tai Chi, which is more is less and less is more. In other words, it's not all about more, more, more. And sometimes we can get more benefit from something less, from a smaller movement than from a bigger movement. Not always, not, it's just something to consider. And it's worth giving it some emphasis, because the mentality seems to be always that we're going to sort of push harder, further, so on and so forth. The last round. Scooping the sea and looking at the sky. And then grasping the tiger's ears. Switch sides. And then grasping the tiger's ears. Parallel. And hands on the shoulders, rolling forwards with your weight going forwards a little bit. And with a little bit of a turn, so that now you're kind of alternating from left to right. Notice when my elbow comes down, it's there, it's an elbow to knee. So get as close as you can, But try and avoid doing this. That's not easy. So if you're out there a bit, it depends how your shoulders are and how your sides are. That's fine, but no further in than that. So now when we go into the exercise bear play, our hands come down just here. And I say that because you're turning this way, and what that can do is bring your hand over, which in some circumstances that is what we would be doing. But in fact, what's going to happen here, your hand goes down here, and I'll exaggerate. What I'm doing is turning here. So it's like I'm turning to push the hand out there. And this area of the chest, where the arm meets the chest and into this side, gently sort of opens out. So there's a little bit of a, it's not even a stretch, it's an opening out there. And then that contracts, bringing you back over, and we feel that on the other side. Nice and smooth. Small and coming down, and then change into getting the ball in front of the shoulder. This time, turn in your body, directs the arm in the same direction. So both this one and the previous one, there's that strong connection to the center, but it can work both ways. And then hands together, cow gazes at the moon. Notice how the leading hand is drawn out, as though you're in water and your hand is just sliding through the water. So it's not like that, it's edge on. One more on each side. Let your arms rest for a moment. Looking forwards and backwards. Just reminding yourself of that basic transfer between feet and hips. But then add in a turn. So you turn in the center toward one knee, and that's where your weight goes. Then on the other side, now making this a little bit more complex, go forwards into your left foot, take a diagonal line, go back when the majority of your weight is in your right hip, move across a little bit, let the body turn, and then turn towards your right. Same thing, back the same way. Move across. Remember that little movement we did when we were stepping, add into that a turn. I'm exaggerating all of this a little bit. Forwards and back. So right hip, left hip and turn. Diagonally across to the right foot, back to the left hip, over to the right hip, turn, pause to the left. Your hands in front of you, just let them follow the movement. It would be quite a complex little shape if you had a pencil, a piece of paper here, and just let the movement trace out a shape. It would be quite complex, wouldn't it? And we're going to go into part in the wild horse's mane, which is mostly here. It's going to be your right arm. You start the same way. You just let the arm swing out a little bit. It follows you back into the left. Hold the ball, move across to the right, and forwards. Just on the top hand, comes straight down. So again, not as much as in bear play, perhaps. You're turning to your left arm, moving to the left, but still the same opening here between shoulder, arm and chest. A movement, therefore, often associated with chest and lungs. You can feel the expansion as the arm is pushed out. Do one more on each side. Good. Come back to the middle, holding your hands over your chest. Another one that helps to open chest and lungs is the archer. If you choose to do this with a breathing pattern, this would be the in-breath as you push out, and then the out-breath as you release. But try to remember, even though you kind of like the exercise obviously works in the chest, that the in-breath should start down here in your belly. So don't sort of deliberately puff out your chest and force the air into your chest. Think of that idea of your lungs filling up from below. Do one more on each side. Come back and rest for a few minutes. Just place one or two hands on your belly. See if you can feel that little bit of movement in your breathing. And then once again, rubbing your hands together. And tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Onto one shoulder. Arm. The other side. Belly. And your legs. Lovely. If you wish to stand, then stand there. Feet hip width apart. Parallel or slightly turned out. Letting your hips drop back and just gently rocking to and fro. And just feel the real limits of your movement. And what's actually happening here is I'm pivoting from my ankles, and the feeling is that I'm getting close to this point. And so you can see my heels coming off the ground and I'm angling forwards. And so what would happen here is I would just naturally take a step. This, by the way, is what in physiotherapy is referred to as the sway envelope. How far can we actually move before there's just a step? And in some walking practices, you actively angle forwards a little bit to do that. That's not what we're trying to do here. What we're trying to do is to, in a way, find that point just before we would take a step. Without straining, without stiffening up. So we have that fairly narrow range of movement. Roughly speaking, think of the arch of your foot is roughly where you'll feel the movement. And then just see where your body wants to come to rest. Now this sinking down, if you were to go back to the forward and backward movement, you may find that you get a little bit of extra movement. I came across the notion of the sway envelope when I was doing some training aimed at sort of exercise instructors for working with people with poor balance. And they were talking about the significance of the sway envelope. And one of the things that they did was there was a partner work exercise. You had to take somebody's arm. And so somebody pulled your arm out like that. And eventually, the further your arm gets, can you see how my body, your body adjusts when, so eventually your arm being drawn out takes you beyond your sway envelope. The interesting thing was, I was working with an aerobics teacher and she slowly lifted my arm up like this and drew my arm out. And then she just dropped my arm down and she said, "You're cheating." And I had no idea what she was on about, but apparently she was saying, as my arm went out, my response was to do this, was to sink down more. I wasn't trying to be funny. I wasn't even particularly aware that I was doing it. It's just a conditioned response. So most of us, when somebody grabs hold of your arm and pulls you, you'll do one of two things. You'll either kind of pull forwards or you'll pull back. Neither of which are necessarily helpful responses. It depends on the circumstances, of course. In Tai Chi, the habit that I taught myself to do in that situation was neither of those two, but rather this. So I was more stable like that. And that's kind of what I mean about developing different habits, more useful habits. So sinking down, aware of that point of balance in your feet and pushing up. So as you sink down, I think I did mention last time, the bubbling well, that point just behind the ball of your foot, could be where you find the point of balance. But wherever you find it, imagine it like the plug hole in the bath and your weight like water draining away through it. Now changing to Wild Goose. There's one of the principal responses that we make in Tai Chi to pretty much everything, really, it's very simple, is that the first thing that we do is to look to root down. Not always that we do, but any kind of change stimulates this quality of rooting down, everything associated with it, the change in the body, the change in the state of the body, and so on and so forth. And then parting the clouds. Why? Sometimes people say, well, to do Tai Chi, just relax. In other words, you allow your center of gravity to drop. One more time. So going back to the sway envelope, and indeed that exercise, if you're tilting forwards and you feel yourself going forwards, the rooting down, the sort of dropping of your hips, the releasing, letting go, relaxing, however you care to think about it, will help you in two ways. One is it will help stop that kind of wobbling around. The other is it will give you more surety in your step. If I do this, I'm kind of flopping forwards, whereas if my response to this is to do this, then I can take a step. So have 1 foot forwards and sink. Transferring your weight. Raising your toes and your heel. And you might find when you do that, you probably won't now because you've all been doing it for some time. But when we first start doing it, we go, oh, it can be a bit like that. Well, that is the response that we want to try and really program our body to make. And then stepping in. And that, that has an obvious physical value, but remember, rooting down isn't just about your hips going back, your center of gravity dropping. It's about coming into that sense of space and calmness in both body and mind. So it has many implications, many applications. And then on the other side. So the regular practice of Tai Chi helps to really build these positive habits. Raising your toes and your heel. And bringing foot in. And taking the step. And then going back. So now, fisherman cast the net. Remembering what the effect of your arms going forwards and out and up can be, which is that you can reach a point where you've overextended your sway envelope, if we want to think of it in those terms. So either make the movement smaller, or if you're getting to here and feeling a bit kind of shaky, can you do that? You just, and essentially what we have to do at that point is try and let ourselves relax in exactly those areas that we're often stiffening up in: shoulders, back, hips, everything clenches up. So that is a difficult habit to break. And then on the other side. One more time. And shake out. Go back to your chairs. And then, but not long after that incident I talked about on the training day, in one of my classes, I had an elderly gentleman, a seated class, and he had a degenerative condition. It'd been with me for a while and clearly getting worse, and it really badly affected his balance. He quite often fell in class, either coming into the class or maybe standing up or something like that. And I didn't like to say to him, don't stand up. So I reckon it's not my job to get people to move less. So but he was in the class, and when you do what they now call manual handling training, the thing they're telling you now is if somebody's going to fall, you shouldn't try and stop them, because if you try and stop them, you can both get hurt. So, if somebody's falling and you try and catch them, you could ruin your back or something like that, which is, again, counterintuitive, but I suppose you can understand it in a way. Well, he didn't give me much choice. He was standing next to me, and he went to fall, and he grabbed my arm. So suddenly there was something like 10 stone of dead weight pulling on my arm, like that. If I'd resisted, I probably would have dislocated my shoulder or something like that. If I hadn't resisted, I probably would have fallen onto him, which wouldn't have done either of us much good. What I actually did, and obviously you don't have time to think about these things. Yeah. So I've done plenty of martial arts training where people try and pull you around. But as he grabbed my arm, I just stepped forward and did that. And because he had hold of my arm, he didn't fall over, which was good. But I mean, I could feel the pull, but I didn't damage myself at all. And it's an interesting example, really, of where these ideas in Tai Chi have very practical value. But we need to practice them so that we can, as I said before, develop the habits. Develop the positive habits of movement and posture and whatever else, so that when we need them, it's going to happen. A couple of years ago, again in the seated class, somebody had been away for a while, and she said when she came back, she said she'd been walking along, and she tripped and fell. And she looked at me and she said, I try to remember what you said. And it was like, I was very flattered by that. But of course, actually, in the moment of falling, it's like, oh, now hold on, Mike said that I've got to do it's actually not going to happen. It needs to be something that your body does essentially on automatic. And that's what a habit is. If your habit is to brush your hair out your eyes, you don't need to think, oh, right, I need to lift this hand and so on and so forth. So a lot of these principles are practiced within the exercises, sometimes in quite difficult circumstances. Parting the wild horse's mane is not an easy exercise to do. So it really challenges our ability to and develops our ability to root down. But we find them in all the exercises. So we come back to this, we come back to embrace tiger, return to mountain. These really fundamental principles, rooting down, centering, whatever label you care to put on them. The Chinese term is sung, which is a term that seems to encapsulate all of those qualities. So embrace tiger, return to mountain. Feeling your hips drop back, seeming to just pull on your shoulders, drawing everything down into the ground, into your center. And then feeling the push back up. And rest. Lovely. Thank you very much, everybody. Have any questions on that? You can always email me with questions.